Welcome to Cyber Talks by Devoteam Cyber Trust, conversations that go beyond the buzzwords to explore what truly matters in cybersecurity. Today we are exploring a fascinating idea. What if cybersecurity professionals acted less like technical specialists and more like strategic lobbyists inside their organizations? Because the reality is this: many companies are investing heavily in cybersecurity, driven by regulations like NIS2, while the threats are increasing, but companies are also growing their digital dependency. And too often, organizations end up compliant on paper while remaining vulnerable in reality. Why? Because cybersecurity is still frequently treated as a technical problem rather than a business capability. To explore this idea, I'm joined today by Josip Matošin, account manager at Devoteam Cyber Trust Germany. Josip brings a unique perspective from working directly with organizations, navigating the intersection between regulation, security strategy, and business transformation. Josip, welcome to Cyber Talks. Let's dive in.
Thanks, Rui, for the introduction. Glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
That's great. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. So in fact, cybersecurity is still often perceived as a technical function or a cost center. Unfortunately, this is changing, but takes time. And when we had our initial conversations, you proposed a very different concept that I really appreciated. It is the idea of the Cyber Lobbyist. What do you mean by that, and why do you believe that organizations need this role today?
So to understand why we need to talk about cyber lobbying, we have to look at the massive structural deadlock most CISOs are facing today still, right? Which is sad. We often hear that, it's a communication problem, the CISO just don't speak the language of the business, of the board. But I actually disagree because in many cases, especially in the mid-market, the CISO has already lost the game before they even open their mouth, not because they are trapped or because they are trapped in a flawed organizational design. And I'm thinking back to the 80s and 90s. If you would have told a CEO back then that the printer guy, the person you call with the hardware when the hardware fails, would one day be a board member, the CIO, they would have laughed at us, right? Because IT was a pure maintenance expense, support function in the basement. But then in the early 2000s and in the 2010s, with the massive digital transformations, with ERP implementations, suddenly IT project leads had to understand the very core of the business. Finance, supply chain, HR, logistics, everything, right? To implement systems like SAP. And this business know-how had redefined the roles of CFOs, COOs, and CEOs, and IT transformed in front of our eyes from a cost center to a value center to a profit center to pretty much the heart of the business of most of our businesses that we have today. And cybersecurity is currently at the same digital transformation stage, I would say, in the early 2000s, but we need to build up more. A modern CISO is definitely not just a technician protecting your firewall. It's your architect for a company's digital nervous system. And to build true resilience, a CISO must understand the business processes better than almost anyone else. They need to know which data represents the crown jewels, which processes are the lifeline of the company's margin. And to get there and to understand that, they also need to understand the political landscape of the own company and take part in it. And that's why this topic of lobbying or being a lobbyist is very, very important to me.
It's really true because, the CISOs might have, and often they have, the knowledge of the adequate practices, but you need to convey the risks in a business language so that organizations can effectively act and adopt them. Many organizations are, although nowadays, investing heavily in regulatory compliance, mainly with frameworks like NIS2. But you often talk about the regulatory reality gap. What does that gap look in practice, in your opinion?
So everybody who's in cybersecurity appreciates NIS2 and DORA because eventually it helps us for our, let's stay with the lobbyist, in our political speech to change the mindset of how we think about cybersecurity. But in the boardroom, NIS2 and DORA are currently still just these buzzwords. And if you ask me what they really are, NIS2 and DORA are that annoying beeping sound in your car when you don't put your seatbelt on. It's a legal attempt to force a cultural shift that should have happened years ago, when we are honest, right? Like back in the 70s, it was absolutely normal to not wear a seatbelt. People hated it, right? More than 60% didn't do it. And it took strict regulation, it took technical prompts, it took things like that beeping sound that led to a massive cultural shift and to make something a life-saving standard that we have today. And I think that NIS2 and DORA are trying to do this for businesses today. However, the reality is what we see within our clients is a massive distance between that beeping sound and actually being buckled up. We see the paper trap every day. Companies hire consultants to write massive manuals, but they don't change the operating model. For example, NIS2 requires a 24-hour incident report, but if the CISO lacks the authority to enforce a modern automated CMDB, they are flying blind. You cannot report what you can't see. It's very easy, right? And if your IT department is also managing assets in Excel, that 24-hour window becomes a legal death trap. And the dirty secret of the industry, because most companies that we talk to are claiming we are compliant, we don't need help, we have backups, but you have to ask the right questions, like have we ever performed a full-scale restore under time pressure? Or more importantly, do we have proven integrity of those backups? If the technical truth doesn't match the legal promise, your compliance is, sorry to say it, it's a fairy tale. And without the lobbying power to demand that compliance becomes a technical requirement, what we call compliance as a code, companies will continue to hire more people just to shuffle paper. And this leads to a labor explosion. It makes the work unattractive for top-tier talent to end up leaving because they want to fight hackers, secure companies, become business managers and not administrators. And I think that is a very important point.
No, you're right. And you pinpoint, in fact, an interesting tension between being secure and being compliant, because many times people take this as a synonym, as like they look the same, but they are not the same, right? So why do you feel that so many organizations fall into the trap of focusing on audit checklists instead of building real security capability?
I think that organizations fall into this trap because they are fundamentally choosing a legal shield over the security sword. For a board of directors, a checklist is a psychological comfort zone. It's a project with a clear end and a shiny certificate that says, we have fulfilled our legal duty, we are no longer liable. But it's exactly about liability protection, not about fighting hackers. And this creates a dangerous house of cards. It builds castles in the air, however you want to call it, that look impressive to an auditor, but have no foundation in the server room. And the problem is that compliance is a snapshot of the past, while capability is your operational muscle in the present. And you don't see high integrity data or an automated recovery process until the very moment it saves the company from bankruptcy, because it's invisible. It rarely gets the budget a visible compliance project receives. And this is where a living and alive ISMS comes in. Cybersecurity, it's not a project, it's a culture. And an ISMS on a shelf is useless. You have to make it come alive by weaving it into daily operations. And as a cyber lobbyist, I use this beeping of NIS2 as a Trojan horse. We tell the board, stop investing in paper that won't protect you in a crash. Invest in compliance as a code, for example, because we must automate the regulatory burden so that compliance becomes a natural byproduct of our technical excellence. We have to stop working for the auditor and start working for the integrity and the actual survival of our business. We need to move from checklist security to operational resilience, turning the CISO from a policeman in the basement into a true business enabler.
I couldn't have said it better. I fully agree with what you say. I also believe that this tension happens also because we need to understand that regulation moves at a slower pace than the reality of the threats. So, in fact, if organizations want to protect them from liability, they do compliance. But we need to understand that what compliance is demanding today was a good practice maybe 10 or 20 years ago. So in fact, organizations need to understand that if they want to practice good security, they need to elevate the bar from what the compliance demands nowadays, right? Because otherwise they are effectively falling into the trap of thinking that they are secure while they are not. Exactly. Another topic that we would like to highlight is about organizational structure, because particularly where the CISO sits in the organization. If you want him to work like a cyber lobbyist, as you say, do you believe that it matters for the effectiveness of security? And if yes, why?
100%. The reporting line for me, or the organizational structure, is the single most important factor that determines whether a security strategy lives or dies. If a CISO reports to a CIO, for example, you create an immediate conflict of interest. A CIO is traditionally measured by speed, uptime, staying within the budget, and cybersecurity by definition often requires adding healthy friction for the sake of safety. If the CISO's voice is filtered by the CIO, security will always lose to operational speed. And without the structural independence, the CISO remains a paper tiger. Unfortunately, it is like that. And you see this still so often with companies, and pretty much responsible for everything, but authorized to do nothing. And to close this reality gap, we must move the CISO from out of the shadow of IT for sure. And most enterprises, for example, already obviously have that, and need to be treated as peers to the other C-level people. That's my take on it, right? Like I've seen many different organizational types, like reporting to the chief legal officer, chief risk officer, also to the chief financial officer, sometimes directly to the CEO. And I have spoken to many people about this because it's a big topic, but I would be actually highly interested, because you've been in the industry a little longer than I've been. What is your take on this, Rui?
Yeah, so first of all, I love the way that you put things. In fact, if you want someone to blame when things go wrong, this person also needs to have the ability to change things and take decisions, because otherwise it's not going to work. And in my opinion, to avoid the conflict of interests, I believe that the CISO needs to partner with the remaining organization, namely with IT, but also with the business. Thus, in my perspective, in the ideal world, the CISO would report to a non-ExCo committee, because even the ExCo committee, they need to manage a P&L, and if they can lower the cost of cybersecurity, maybe makes the numbers nicer, not necessarily the balance between cost benefit in terms of security. So reporting to a non-ExCo would be the ideal world, but it depends on the size of the organization, of course. So some of the other solutions that you mentioned are also worth to consider. But nowadays we are also seeing massive investments in AI-driven security tools, like SOC automation, CM, SOAR, and other technologies. Yet you argue that this creates what you call the AI human paradox, right? It's really interesting. That's why I brought this topic in as well on our conversation. What do you mean by that, Josip?
So what I mean by that describes something that I would describe as a psychological and a technical trap. We are investing millions and billions in AI-driven tools, SOC automation, SOAR, SIM, you mentioned it, with the promise that technology will solve our problems. But it does create two massive issues that I've seen. This is all not my idea, it's my observations with 10 years in the cybersecurity market. First, it creates a false sense of security among employees and leadership. People start thinking like, hey, AI will handle it, it's an intelligent system, it'll catch the fish. And this mental offloading is exactly what hackers exploit. When humans stop being vigilant because they trust the black box of AI, we see a massive increase of successful social engineering. The more high-tech our defense becomes, the more the attacker focuses on the low-tech human element, because that is where the guard is now down. And secondly, the paradox is that the more you automate, the more you actually depend on top-tier human expertise. AI is great at filtering out the noise, the tier one, the boring alerts that leaves your team and this leaves the teams with only the most complex, high-stakes edge cases that are the ones that AI can solve, and this requires a level of intuition that a machine just doesn't have. And I argue that we are often buying Ferraris, but treating our drivers like administrative clerks. We force our experts into labor explosion of compliance paperwork, with the rest of the workforce develops a digital blindness because they rely too much on the tech. So we need to realize that AI is a tool, it's not a savior. If we don't fix the security culture, it is my most important thing that I always tell to everybody on the board or with CISOs that I talking about this culture, like we need to ensure that humans stay the critical final sensor. AI just becomes an expensive way to fail faster, sometimes I believe. And we must use AI to automate boring compliance tasks, for example, to free up our experts, so that they can focus on the thing AI can do, understanding the human intent and the strategic integrity of the business. And that is where this paradoxon comes from.
No, you're totally right. And the problem is that attackers are getting more and more sophisticated, and they know about this paradox. And of course, they'll try to exploit it. And they will also try to exploit the enlarged attack surface that AI is also helping to develop, right? So in fact, if cybersecurity is to become a real business enabler, what do you believe that needs to change in the way that organizations think about cybersecurity strategy nowadays?
So, I mean, a lot of the already mentioned, right? Like the organizational structure, how we think about that, to have cyber become an absolute board topic. And if this is, if you have a foundation like this to become a real business enabler, we have to stop treating security as a stoppage and start treating it as a production factor. The biggest change required is moving from reactive defense to operational resilience. Like right now, most strategies are built on the hope that we can block every attack, but a business enabler knows that 100% protection is a myth. A real enabler ensures that if a hit occurs, the business doesn't stop. And if we look at, we talked about regulations before, we talked about DORA, NIS2, what is currently like the most important topic for the European market. But what if you are a deliverer for the automotive industry and you don't have TSACs, right? You're bankrupt. And in the future, if you don't have the certificates, if you don't have the stamp that says, yes, they are compliant, and maybe even further in an ideal world, but they are compliant, it actually changes the way of perception, and you start treating your security as you treated IT in the digital transformation area. And this is where I think business enablement is really important, because the companies that hire modern CISOs, business CISOs, the companies that have this topic in the board member, they are always one step ahead. They have seen NIS2 coming. They didn't wait until any deadlines. They prepared anything in it, and they analyzed it, because sometimes it's also like, it's very broad how it is described, like penetration testing on a regular timing. What does that mean? Once a year, once a month, whatever, right? Companies who understand this have a huge advantage, in my opinion, for the future, and to like really be business relevant and gain future profitability.
I fully agree with you. In fact, you know, when NIS2 came into the arena, I saw NIS2 and I spoke a bit about it, and I thought the companies that have been practicing the cyber basic hygiene, they will not need to do much, although they would just need to demonstrate that they are already doing it. So the way that I saw this kind of regulation coming is a bit like leveling up the common sense, because I believe that what NIS2 and other regulations like this, what they ask is the common sense. The problem is that the common sense sometimes is not common. So I believe that these regulations, they just level up that, but the ones that were already practicing the common sense, the work that they had to do, it was residual, because it was just a matter of demonstrating I'm already doing it, right? So it's like, no, I don't need a regulation for someone to come and tell me that I need to brush my teeth. So it's the way. So we need effectively to have this business mindset and to build on top of this. And I believe that we need more cyber lobbyists like yourself, like myself, to spread the word and to focus in what really matters. Before we close, I'd like to talk about careers. You previously worked as one of the early specialized cybersecurity recruiters in Germany. And based on that experience, what do you believe that makes someone truly impactful in the cybersecurity field today?
So there's so many things, right? I've been in this previous industry for quite some time, but I think the most important point that everybody needs to understand, not just like career advice for people who want to join cybersecurity, but also the ones who are hiring cybersecurity. And this is not just for cybersecurity, it stands for IT as well, pretty much, because in this industry, skills are often required, but the true skill is, in my opinion, is attitude, because you can teach skills. You can advise someone on becoming a security analyst if they have the right mindset of curiosity, asking the right questions, of drive and ambition, to really getting things done and understanding that cybersecurity is not 9 to 5. And number 3, which is pretty much what I've seen a lot, is a helper syndrome. I don't know, like maybe I say it in different words. Like if you are a CISO, if you're a person in IT, you are often defined by your losses and not by your wins, right? Like I always say, CIOs and CISOs are goalkeepers. They can have the perfect game, but one time not catching the ball, it's a straight goal, and they say they know who to blame.
I love that.
And who are the people who can live with this pressure on an everyday basis? The people who have the right passion for it. So I'm really asking everybody who's hiring, stay away from all these job descriptions that are wish lists, because especially on the European market, I have learned that people are very critical. If they don't match 70%, they will just not send their CV in. They are not as opportunistic as maybe people in the US, which I've learned. So I'd really advise companies, stay open-minded. Everybody can have a career in cybersecurity. If you ask 50 CISOs how they became CISO, how many answers will you get? 50, 100%. It's not the same with other lines of differences. I mean, my best example is a friend of mine in New York City, a very well-respected CISO. He's a doctor in philosophy. How did he end up becoming a CISO? Curiosity, wants to know, really go into the weeds and understanding why, how does a computer work? How is an email sent back and forth? How is this? He had that curiosity, and eventually he became one of the most booked speakers on the New York and the US market when it comes to conferences and stuff like that. And I think if you want to have a career in cybersecurity, there is multiple ways in it. You can go a very technical way. You can study. You can do apprenticeships. You can start with IT foundation. You can come from business, which is absolutely something that I see more and more, that companies are hiring people from the business and rather learning them information security, right? And instead of vice versa, because understanding the business, as I said in the very beginning of our conversation, is one of the crucial things for a CISO, to not just become this lobbyist, but to also be treated with the same level of respect from the other board members. And I think that's pretty much the way to go.
Josip, I remember on our prep calls you telling me about a formula that you had in your mind. I think it was talent plus skills times drive equals impact. Do you want to let the audience know a bit about your formula?
So talent and skill is just combined. Like, let's say you can give 10 points for every of these 3 variables, right? Like you can give 10 points to talent and skills. Then you have like 20, and 20 times your drive and ambition, what you invest into training, into getting smarter, into reading. Like if this is just times 1, it's still just 20 points. But if you have someone with 6 points as talent, plus 3 point at skills, but you have the drive and ambition, you take it times 8, for example, right? Like who's good in math? It's more than 20. And that is always how I supported as a consultant a lot of companies to understand who they need to hire and what they really want, because AI paradoxon, it comes pretty much back. Today, everybody has the tools to answer perfectly on a video call. So what kind of questions can I have to find out if somebody is really good in critical thinking, in prioritizing the right way? And because there's also such a huge shift. 20 years ago, you said you trade money versus time. Today, you trade energy versus sense. How much sense does it make to really take this project? How do I prioritize this? Because everybody is very, very busy in our area. And yeah, this is where this comes from, right? If you have the right mindset of training and upskilling, then you will the hard worker will always be the lazy talent.
No, it's great, and in fact the drive works as an amplifier, right, of their talents, of their skills. So if they do work, the drive will amplify and provoke much more impact. I fully agree as well. It has been a great conversation, and unfortunately time flies. Josip, thank you very much for being in Cyber Talks, and let's keep up. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Thanks.